following sermon was delivered at the 10:30 worship service at the United Methodist Church of Kent. Please enjoy.
Then the Lord God said, "It is not good. It is not good that the human is alone." And notably, of course, most physicians and psychologists and social scientists would agree. The U.S. Surgeon General, too, who's been addressing for the past few years our growing epidemic of loneliness as a public health crisis. Indeed, it is not good for humans to be alone. In Genesis chapter 2, one of our primary origin stories in our faith tradition, one of those stories that tells us who we are and how things came to be, God considers the first human being. That human has been formed from the humus, the topsoil of the earth, and filled and inspired by God's own breath. That human is surrounded by every tree, both pleasant to look at and good for food, with plenty of fresh flowing water all around. And God looks at them, and God considers them, and God says it is not good for them to be alone. And in so saying, God makes this profound declaration about what it means to be human. To be human is to need more than life and breath, more than food and water. To be human is to need companions, to need each other. For we can only be human together. And so God makes the human a helper, although that typical translation, helper, falls rather short. The Hebrew word used here has no connotation of subordination or weakness attached to it as we sometimes presume. The helper is not an assistant. They are a companion. They are a fully equal partner. Their relationship will be one of mutuality and caring. So eventually God creates such a companion by dividing the first human being into two. Again, the typical translation here really isn't the most helpful. It's not that God is doing surgery. God doesn't just pluck out a single rib from the person. God removes, really in Hebrew, a side. God splits the first human being into two parts. And both humans discover a partner. Both humans discover a companion in the other one. Someone who will have their back. Someone who will stay with them no matter what. They will embrace or cling to each other, we are told, and return to being one flesh, those two parts brought back together again. And though we've sometimes limited this statement to being about marriage, that word marriage doesn't occur here in this story, and in fact rarely occurs throughout any of the Hebrew scriptures. And the word translated today as wife in this version, this translation, also means more generally woman. And so this story is about far more than marriage. This is a story about the human condition, the truth that we all need each other in order to be whole. Like the very first two human beings, we are created from each other. We become who we are through other people. From our parents or our primary caregivers to other adults and children we are young, to teachers and friends as we continue to grow and mature, to those who show us throughout our lives what love is and what love is not. All the various people who come into and go out of our lives, we become who we are through other people. Which is exactly why it's so painful when our relationships get ruptured. It's why it's so destructive when we are divided from one another. It's why it's so deadly when we are isolated and at odds. When our connections are frayed or torn apart, when our society becomes fragmented and fractured along political party lines or otherwise, our ability to trust and to hope becomes eroded. We lose our capacity to be fully human. And so we need opportunities and we need avenues to be together, to restore our true communion. We need postures and we need practices, ways of being and ways of doing that help us to rediscover the ties that bind us to each other. And so during these 5 weeks this fall, from last Sunday through to the end of this month of October, we are in worship together remembering Jesus' golden rule, that rule to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. That rule as a cord that reconnects us. As we do unto others, we take the initiative toward healing our relationships and rebuilding our hope and restoring our trust. This is what we are calling this year our campaign for compassion. And it's not just during these weeks before the coming election, but it's into the coming year as well. This shared commitment as a community of faith to spreading compassion throughout our neighborhoods. For the first 3 weeks of this campaign, we're being guided by Micah 6:8 and the practices that are outlined there. God has told you what is good and what the Lord requires: to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with God. So last Sunday we began with justice as a practice of love. Love enacted to help close some of the gaps that exist among us, very real and very material gaps in opportunity and access in this competitive and unjust world. Now this week we're turning to Micah's second practice, the practice of kindness, another practice of love that has the power to reconnect us. Throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, including here in Micah 6:8, the word translated as kindness is the Hebrew word hesed. Now, hesed appears more than 250 times throughout our Hebrew Scriptures, indicating for us just how essential it is to our faith. But it's also more than the English word kindness. Sometimes hesed is used to express concern for another person, and in those instances it may be translated into English as compassion. At other times, hesed is used for providing aid or charity to someone who has no expectation of this kindness being offered. And in those instances, often it is translated into English as mercy. At still other times, it is used to express a deep commitment to an abiding relationship with another person, like those first two human beings who embrace or cling to each other. And in those instances, hesed often is translated into English as either steadfast love or loyalty. But however we translate it, as compassion or mercy or steadfast love or kindness, our Scriptures understand hesed as a primary characteristic of God and God's relationship with creation. And so, of course, what God demonstrates toward us, we are meant and made to demonstrate toward each other. Which is why Micah says that God requires justice and kindness. To do justice, to love kindness, is to live in the image of our Creator. It's also how we want to be treated, justly and kindly. And so that's what we need to do unto others, not waiting for others to do unto us first. Those who treat us well and those who don't. Those who are just and kind toward us and those who aren't. Those who vote like us and those who don't. Kindness is the way that God cares for us, for you and for the person next to you, and for the person you cannot stand. And so kindness is the way that we are called to care for each other. Kindness is the way we're meant to live toward each other, toward all of our fellow creatures. Kindness, mercy, steadfast love. Doing kindness unto others has the power to reconnect us across all the divisions that we have created, to rebuild our trust, to restore our hope as we move forward together. Doing kindness unto others reaffirms the humanity, the belovedness, the goodness of our neighbors, while maintaining our own humanity too. We benefit when we're on the receiving end of kindness, as we realize our need for other people and their goodness. We benefit too when we offer kindness to others, as we exercise our own capacity for good. Made in the image of a God who is good, we are made for goodness. We are made for good works to be our way of life. It's who we are as human beings, which is why it feels good to do good. It's why it feels good to be kind. It's why we love to give gifts to each other and say encouraging words to each other and donate to charities that we know are making a positive difference in the world. Doing kindness cultivates our joy. In fact, we are so wired for kindness that we even benefit when we're just witnessing it, when we're not directly involved. This past week during our Tuesday evening book discussion, one of you reminded us of that wonderful old quote from Mr. Rogers speaking about his mother. Her encouragement in moments of crisis or difficulty, you remember it, to always look for the helpers. There will always be helpers, she would tell him. They may not be at the center of attention, they may be easy to overlook, but they are always there. Caring people, generous people, people doing kindness unto others. It's happened once again this past week, of course, in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. The storms, the flooding have been absolutely devastating, but the acts of kindness, small ones and big ones, up close and from a distance, those acts of kindness have been so encouraging, lifting our spirits as we notice them, as we remember our inherent goodness and our connectedness to each other. Rescue crews reaching out, neighbors helping neighbors, folks with still functioning wells offering water to those who need it. All of it, so far as I'm aware, without anyone checking first to see which campaign signs were in their neighbors' yards. Human beings just enacting hesed toward each other, kindness and mercy and steadfast love. Not because they deserve to receive it, not because they're on the same partisan team, but because there's something inside each of us that knows it is not good for humans to be alone. Kindness really is more than just being nice or being polite or meeting needs. Kindness is love in action. Love in action, helping folks to feel seen and heard and accompanied. Kindness is love in action that reminds folks that they are not ever alone. In this highly polarized moment, kindness also is not glossing over our differences, pretending that our different political opinions don't matter or don't exist. Instead, doing kindness means insisting that those differences of opinion do not define us. They matter. Absolutely, our different political opinions do matter. And discussing them and even debating those differences can be clarifying and edifying for the whole, but only if it begins in kindness and in curiosity and in mercy and steadfast love. Only if it begins with a fundamental affirmation that the person with whom I am disagreeing matters more than my need to be seen as right. And so, here is our invitation for this morning. There are 30 days remaining before Election Day. Election Day is 4 weeks from this coming Tuesday. What if we focus as a community of faith during these last 30 days before Election Day on saturating our community with kindness? I don't mean to sound naive as I suggest this, or to suggest that kindness is magic, that it will instantly solve all of our problems or heal all of the harm, but I am absolutely certain that it will help. Because if do unto others is our golden rule, then kindness is our golden thread, the thread that pulls us back together by reminding us of the truth about ourselves and each other. And so on the table in the atrium this morning, we have provided a printed handout for you. It is 30 acts of kindness in 30 days. The invitation, the encouragement for each of us this morning is to practice some of these ideas or come up with your own. Simple acts of love, simple ways that each of us can positively impact the neighbors around us every day. And my encouragement, too, is to be deliberate about it. I know we sometimes talk about random acts of kindness, but I really believe there should be nothing random about kindness. It is far too important to leave to chance. Kindness is a ripple effect in ourselves and in our neighborhoods. The more we practice it, the more we are changed by it, and the more kindness we cultivate in the world. So share the handout with others and invite others to join you. And then check in on each other and support each other, encourage each other in the coming days. And then just one final illustration for this morning about kindness from today's gospel. In Mark this morning, we find folks bringing their children to Jesus, but the disciples trying to prevent them. Jesus, we are told, becomes angry, and then he chooses to respond with what I would call kindness. Let the children come to me, he says, and then he embraces the children, and he blesses them. Surrounded by a culture of cruelty, Jesus' kindness cuts through it all. Jesus' kindness cuts through the rejection, the harm of those who are gathered around him. So my prayer is that by God's grace, our kindness may do the very same. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the United Methodist Church of Kent Sermon Podcast. For more information about the church, visit www.kentmethodist.org.